In many ways, the New York subway is like the bloodline of the city. And New Yorkers have this love and hate relationship with it because it's extremely convenient. It does get you everywhere, it does run all night, but it's also disgusting. And it's one of the most historic, one of the first, one of the most used, and one of the most famous cities in the world. Like, it's an iconic subway system. But how does it fall into this terrible decay?
As a matter of fact, it's had a state of emergency that the governor declared.
The current state of decline is wholly unacceptable.
I also ran this little survey experiment thing with everybody. So I will be visiting the ugliest stations that you guys pointed out. So that makes up for a company forensics story.
As much as we love making videos about failed companies, this is not what we do for a living. At Slidebean, we help companies raise money by helping them tell better stories through their pitch decks, or crawl the web to find investors for them, or keep track of their conversations with investors, or looking at their slides and helping them tell better stories, or financial modeling, or keeping track of SaaS expenses. Slidebean is this suite of tools for startup founders. Sign up is free, and you can check it out at slidebean.com, or even subscribe directly through our new YouTube subscription system.
It was an event like no other that New Yorkers had ever seen, and it put New York City on the map for having completed a great public work.
The New York City subway is, in so many ways, the heart that beats beneath one of the busiest cities in the world. And it has done so for almost 120 years. It carries 5 million passengers a day with over 1,400 kilometers of tracks and almost 500 stations. Plus, it's the largest subway network in the Western world. By the looks of it, it was pretty swanky at one point in history. In the 30s and 40s, the New York City subway was really, believe it or not, one of the best in the world. It was vital for the city, as it still is today. But nowadays, it looks like this.
I'm just stating for the record, it's shit. Yeah, it's human.
I actually remember the first time I came to this station. Wow. It's also the City Hall station, so I feel that it should be better. It gives me like some of like these Minas Moria vibe because the columns are so high. But I am gonna say 2 out of 5 trains. I think there's worse stuff.
You've done more than anyone else to raise city planning to a science.
So the first key person in this story is a guy named Robert Moses. This Moses is, by all means, a controversial character. Some people will say that Robert Moses was the master behind 20th century New York. But most people agree that he ruined public transportation, and he was racist and corrupt. In the 20s and 30s, Moses was in charge of parks and even the Central Park Zoo. Moses had this vision for New York, filled with parks and beaches and pools. And to get to these places, people would drive cars. Now, most historians agree that Moses hated public transportation. So Moses had one thing in his favor. He was this brilliant guy, this brilliant negotiator. So he actually got a lot of the stuff that he wanted. And as a public official, he would sell his ideas better than anyone else. The bad thing was that all of them included highways and cars. This is, of course, a sign of the times. In the 40s and the 50s, a car was really part of the American dream. And those who couldn't afford a car were just left to their own means and their own devices. Now, the problem is that Moses took it to another level. He built over 13 new expressways across New York City. He altered public transportation forever because these expressways, they cluttered poor neighborhoods with traffic and ramps and overpasses. Meanwhile, the rich neighborhoods remain rich and trafficless. Many of the bridges that were built in the city, they just lack mass transit elements. And frequently, Moses managed to leverage budgets for rail and for train projects and use them for bridges and for massive highway loops. This historian called Robert Caro wrote that when Robert Moses came to power in New York City in 1934, the city's mass transportation system was probably the best in the world. And by the time he left in 1968, it was quite possibly the worst.
14th Street would normally be a good station. It connects the green and the yellow and the L line, so that's a useful station. It has its regular problems like trash and disgustingness, but this station stands on a curve. That's why you need special platforms. And the noise, the screeching is just insane. I'll grade it 3 out of 5 trains.
The city is awake. People seeking, expecting safe, quick transportation. A system owned by the citizens of New York City.
To reorganize transportation, New York ended up creating the MTA in '65. So the MTA is the largest public transit authority in the US. They control buses and trains and the subway. New York City had this new authority in charge of these things, but it was super complex. It would face some of the most brutal years in subway history. If you think that the subway today is bad, the 70s were the stuff of nightmares in the New York City subway. By the turn of the decade, New York was really in deep shit with rampant crime and drug use, plus thanks to a fiscal crisis, there was no money for either police or for repairs. So the city chose to defer maintenance on this subway system for years, maybe decades. So these factors made the New York City subway one of the most dangerous places to be in the 70s and the 80s. New Yorkers were trying to avoid the tunnels, they were trying to avoid the stations, the trains, everything. Trains were still running into delays, and they of course had mechanical problems, so waiting at a station was like a death wish in the 70s. They were riding subway cars crowded with graffiti, and they got off at these lonely, dirty stations. And with such few passengers, the 70s brought along some of the most vicious cycles of low ridership and price hikes. And again, money becomes the issue here, because the MTA was desperate for any capital. So what they did is they increased the pricing, and sometimes they increased the price of a ticket, many times in the same year. But that money was disappearing in a web of lies and corruption. Battling through this all, by the late 70s, the MTA were making massive efforts to improve.
The thing with 181st Street is that there's no stairway out. There's only one elevator, set of elevators up or down, and you have to take them. The station itself is just average. It's just that the elevator thing really triggers your claustrophobia, fire, fear, etc. But I'm gonna give it a 3 out of 5.
Somehow the 80s would become a decade of slow but very meaningful change. And by the end of the decade, riding in the subway was no longer life and death. New York trains meant that, first of all, they ran on time. Plus, in '89, the city celebrated that graffiti was gone from the trains, at least. But still, the 90s brought a lot of change. The Metro card made traveling much more accessible. The token was gone, and now people could pay for unlimited rides with their card. This is a bubble of more ridership and more trains and more on-time performance, which actually consistently grew during the 90s and the early 2000s. And by 2003, the on-time performance of the New York trains reached an impressive 97%. There was still this problem lurking underneath, which was how old the system was. Now, some of the trains are so old that the MTA can no longer buy spares from the manufacturer because they don't exist. And this, of course, means a lot of breakdowns. A 2017 New York Times article showed that the average subway car breaks down every 400,000 miles or so. The new technology allows cars to operate fine for 750,000 miles. A New York City subway car breaks down every 33,000 miles. That is 12 times more than the average. And then there's, of course, the signaling system. So the New York City subway separates its tracks into 1,000 feet sections that have this signal. Now, electricity runs through these sections, so whenever a train enters that section, it short circuits the system, and then it sends a signal indicating that a train is going through that section. So that's, of course, very useful, so you can warn or even stop other trains behind this one. This system is from the 30s. So this system that prevents accidents, that prevents trains from crashing with each other, is almost 100 years old. Most people don't know this, but the actual MTA, they don't know where in the system a specific train is. There's just no way to track it. All they can know is which section of the track they're in. So most of the time, they're just putting together pieces and guessing and estimating. And of course, the problem is that the system fails once every 11 hours or so. It's so primitive that even a soda can generate a failure or a delay. And we're gonna talk about trash in a minute.
So I came to the 14th Street station because there's this underpass that you have to go through if you're connecting from the green line to the orange line. And it's usually super gloomy and disgusting and a little scary if you're crossing it at night. But today there was this guy selling incense, so the underpass actually smelled good. I'm gonna give it 5 out of 5 trains for effort.
The New York City Transit Authority is an affiliate of the MTA. And again, they run the New York City Subway, but the MTA isn't the owner. The owner of the system is the City of New York. So the City of New York leases this whole track system to the MTA. All of these parties have to agree on how to finance the operation of the trains, and they of course rarely come to an agreement. Now, take those glorious 80s and 90s. After a lot of investment, the city turned its back to the subway, and they started cutting funds for the MTA. This, and I'm only beginning with this, investigations have revealed that the MTA is kind of like the politician's piggy bank. They take millions that should go to transit, and they just use them on other expenses for the city, or not for the city. So of course, desperate for cash, unable to increase fares to cover expenses, the MTA has turned to manage its debt through bonds. Since 1981, the MTA has issued millions of dollars in debt. And by the year 2000, it had reached $12 billion in debt through these bonds. This was getting so out of control that the MTA decided to restructure its debt with some Wall Street dudes, which has spiraled badly in the past. This, of course, actually brought some money for the MTA in the short term, but this meant that the MTA would have to pay debt all the way until 2032. The big problem was that once they refinanced this, the money never really got to them. The same problem persisted. The MTA was still the government's piggy bank for other projects. The debt still exists. It's estimated that by 2017, 1 out of every $6 that the MTA spent went to paying debt. Now, not only that, every bond, of course, comes with a fee. And the MTA has paid more than $400 million for fees on those bonds alone. And that's one of the reasons why Andrew Cuomo finally decided to declare this state of emergency in 2017. But the problems were far too big for the moment. The problem is that fixing the New York City subway is almost impossible because it runs 24/7 and it is the busiest system in the Western world. Before the pandemic, 5.5 million people rode the New York City subway every single day. That's about 1.7 billion passengers per year. This is so many people that of course translates into a lot of problems. But the subway is so key to New York that the MTA simply can't stop the entire system to repair all of its problems and then restart it. The best thing they can do now is just tackle individual problems one by one. And for that, even for that, they need money. And the problem is that the pandemic screwed up the MTA's finances even worse. To give you an example, the total operating revenue for 2021 was around 1.7 billion, less than 2019, which was 5 billion. Out of these, 1.2 billion or so comes from tickets and from fare boxes. Taxes and subsidies add another 4.5 billion. And then operating expenses were 12.1 billion. So after depreciation in 2021, the New York City had a deficit of $2.1 billion. And that's, of course, let's not forget that by the end of 2020, the MTA already had $38 billion in outstanding debt, which has tripled since 2000. All this, of course, has a direct effect on the repair budget. Instead of the $13 billion that the MTA was planning for construction in 2020, they were only able to dish out a third of that. And the plans, sadly, don't look great for the long run.
The 100-year-old system that runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, have to keep investing.
Today, the MTA has a program called the 2020-2024 Capital Program. It's estimated to be a $55 billion program to bring the subway to modern standards. By August 21, it had only seen $2 billion of this money. $15 billion should have come from the congestion charges. This is a charge that the city intends to put on cars that drive inside Manhattan. But they're going to start in 2023 at the earliest. And the problem is that the MTA becomes much more expensive to run every new year. The equipment is older, the debt is larger, and the budget is smaller. And I'm not even going to talk about inflation. In fact, the MTA's debt issues have become so out of control that legislators want to cut part of the capital program funding that they originally had approved because it's just so expensive to fund the subway. As for the state of emergency, Cuomo actually ended it in 2021. I guess that things were less bad, which helped. Anyway, authorities actually cleaned some drains, they fixed some broken signals, and they repaired some damaged rails. But some of the solutions just seemed improvised. For example, they removed the trash cans. They actually decided that they needed to remove them from the stations to prevent fires. But people, of course, just resorted to throwing the trash on the tracks, which cost even more fires. In the end, they have, of course, had to bring those back, which cost millions of dollars. Now, passenger safety is another issue, which has sparked authorities to take some action. But all of these solutions, in the end, are patches. They're nothing else. Even that massive repair bill might not work. After all, there's a problem and a lot of hungry hands trying to get a slice of it. It is actually fascinating to see how New York relies on the subway so much and how this system manages to barely survive. It takes millions of people to and from their jobs every single day. But I guess there's also no other choice on how to go. Once it was the pride of New York City. It even managed to overcome the darkest of years. It's embedded in our pop culture. And still, the city can't find a way to help it. These trains that we ride keep the city alive, even though they're absolutely dying.